I came home at lunch because of something as small and forgettable as hunger, and for the rest of my life I have hated the ordinary weakness of that moment. If I had ignored the ache in my stomach, if I had stopped at the deli near the hardware store, if I had finished repairing the hinge on the garage door before thinking about leftovers, I might have remained the same man for a little longer, perhaps a week, perhaps a month, perhaps years. I might have continued waking up beside Margaret with the same dull trust I had carried for 3 decades. I might have continued believing that quiet routines were proof of loyalty. I might have continued walking through my own house like a man who understood the shape of his life. Instead, at 12:15 on a Tuesday afternoon, I pulled into my driveway, saw my wife's Honda parked where it should not have been, and felt the first thin crack open beneath my feet. My name is Thomas Whitmore. I was 63 years old then, retired for 2 years after 41 years in the postal service, most of them spent supervising routes, schedules, inventory, vehicles, and men who learned quickly that a missed detail could ruin an entire day. I was not an emotional man by habit. My life had trained that out of me. You do not move hundreds of thousands of letters through weather, strikes, holidays, breakdowns, and human laziness by reacting to every feeling that touches your chest. You learn to pause. You learn to check the facts. You learn that panic makes bad decisions look urgent. That training saved me many times in my career. It also made me slow to admit what was happening inside my marriage. Margaret had kissed my cheek that morning before leaving for the insurance office. She always kissed the same place, a brief cool touch just below my right eye, never lingering, never warm enough to invite anything in return. Her perfume stayed behind her in the kitchen, something floral and expensive that I had bought her the previous Christmas, because she circled the bottle twice in a catalogue and left it open on the breakfast table. She wore a cream blouse and navy skirt, sensible heels, pearl earrings, and the confidence of a woman who believed she could still move through the world without anyone questioning where she had been or what she intended to do. At 58, she still looked carefully kept, not young but polished. I had mistaken that polish for self-respect. Later, I would understand that polish can also be armor. "Don't forget the garage hinge," she said while taking her keys from the bowl near the door. "It squeaks every time I come in." "I'll get to it," I told her. "You always say that." I said I'll get to it. She looked at me for a second longer than necessary, not with affection, not even irritation, just that thin measuring look she had developed since my retirement, as if she had expected old age to make me more useful and instead found me merely present. "Try not to overdo it," she said. "You know how your shoulder gets." I nodded. She left. The garage door groaned upward. The Honda backed into the morning light and disappeared down Maple Street. That was our marriage by then. Instructions, small corrections, weather reports, appointment reminders, the brief logistics of 2 people who had once built a family and now mostly maintained a shared address. I did not think of it as tragic because people my age are told to appreciate stability. We are told passion fades. We are told companionship matters more. We are told routine is the reward for surviving the storms of youth. So I called it peace because I did not want to call it emptiness. The morning passed in its usual harmless way. I watered Margaret's roses because she liked to say they were hers even though I had dug the beds, mixed the soil, spread the mulch, fixed the cracked irrigation line, and pruned the branches every spring while she stood nearby with coffee giving suggestions from the patio. I sorted mail, paid the electric bill, tightened the loose handle on the pantry door, and spent nearly 40 minutes kneeling beside the garage hinge with a can of lubricant, 2 screwdrivers, and the stubborn awareness that I could still fix small mechanical problems more easily than human ones. By 11:30 my knees ached and my stomach growled. I remembered the meatloaf wrapped in foil on the second shelf of the refrigerator, the one Margaret had made the night before and criticized because it had dried out around the edges. I decided to drive home for lunch. It is terrible how ordinary disaster can look from the outside. The street was quiet. The lawns were trimmed. Mrs. Callahan's sprinkler ticked steadily across the road, shining in arcs of sunlight. A delivery truck idled halfway down the block. Nothing warned me. No dark sky. No sudden cold. No sound in my head except the radio fading as I turned into the driveway and saw Margaret's Honda already parked there. For a moment I sat with my hand on the gearshift and looked at it. She should have been at work. She always ate at her desk. She had said many times that lunch breaks were for people with easy jobs. My first thought was sickness. My second was that she had forgotten something. My third, small and ugly and immediately rejected, was that she had lied to me. I entered through the side door using my key. The house felt occupied but restrained, the way a church feels when people are whispering somewhere out of sight. The living room was empty. The television was off. No purse on the table. No shoes by the stairs. I heard water before I heard voices. The low slap and shifting echo from the backyard pool, followed by a laugh that made my body pause before my mind understood why. Margaret's laugh, not the polite laugh she used with neighbors, not the tired laugh she gave me when I tried to remember an old joke. This one was loose and bright and careless, the laugh of a woman who had forgotten she was supposed to be careful. Then I heard a man answer her. I knew that voice. David Chen, my son-in-law. My daughter Emily had married David 8 years earlier under a white tent in a vineyard 2 counties over. I had paid for half the wedding because David's parents claimed they were between investments at the time, which I later learned meant between creditors. David was handsome in the easy way of men who assume rooms will forgive them. He worked in commercial construction management, or at least that was the title he used when people asked. He had a way of placing his hand on someone's shoulder while talking that seemed warm until you realized it was also a claim. He called me Tom when he wanted to sound equal, Dad when he wanted a favor, and Sir only in public when someone important might notice. I had never loved him, but I had accepted him because Emily loved him. Fathers learn to swallow many doubts for the sake of their children's happiness. I moved toward the kitchen window. I do not remember deciding to do it. I remember the cool granite counter under my palm and the curtain edge between my fingers. I remember the bright water beyond the glass, the harsh noon sun flattening everything into cruel clarity. Margaret was in the pool. David was with her. At first their bodies were distorted by the shimmering surface, and my mind reached for innocent explanations with the frantic loyalty of a fool. Maybe Margaret had slipped. Maybe David had come to help. Maybe Emily was there somewhere. Maybe there was still a version of this scene that would not destroy everyone. Then Margaret wrapped her legs around his waist and kissed him. There are sights the mind refuses for a second, because accepting them would require immediate death of the self that existed before. I did not think words. I did not think affair or betrayal or my wife or my daughter's husband. I simply watched Margaret's hand slide over the back of David's wet neck while his mouth moved against hers with the familiarity of repetition. He knew the angle of her face. She knew where to put her hand on his shoulder. Their bodies did not negotiate. They remembered. I felt the first wave of nausea so sharply I thought I might vomit into the sink. My legs weakened. A small buzzing filled my ears. I gripped the counter harder and stared. They were not ashamed, because they did not know they were being seen. That was what made it worse. Shame can make people look human. Without it, they looked free. I thought about Sunday dinners. David sitting across from me, eating roast chicken with the same hands that now held my wife beneath the water. Margaret asking Emily if she and David had thought more seriously about children, while David's eyes drifted to Margaret for half a second too long. I thought about the times Margaret had said she was staying late at the office during tax season even though insurance work did not have tax seasons. I thought about the way David had started dropping by to help with odd jobs whenever Emily worked double shifts at the animal clinic. I thought about all the small moments that had entered my life disguised as nothing. The body knows before pride permits the mind to admit it. I backed away from the window. I should have left the house. I should have called Emily. I should have walked outside and ended the scene in full sunlight, forced them to scramble, to cover themselves, to stammer and lie under my gaze. That is what a better man might have done, or a weaker man. I still do not know which. Instead, I climbed the stairs because shock makes strange decisions feel mechanical. The hallway smelled faintly of Margaret's perfume. Our bedroom door was open. I stood in the doorway and looked at the bed we had shared for 30 years, made that morning by my hands, now somehow obscene in its neatness. Her earrings from the night before sat in a porcelain dish. Her robe hung over the chair. A damp towel lay folded over the edge of the bed, which meant she had planned to return here after the pool. Planned. That word entered me like a blade sliding between ribs. This was not impulse, not a moment, not confusion. It had furniture, timing, preparation. Then I saw the bottle on the nightstand. At first, I thought it was lotion. I picked it up, already knowing what it was before my eyes confirmed it. Personal lubricant. expensive, nearly full. My hand tightened around the plastic until it creaked. 6 months earlier, after a dinner where Margaret had drunk too much wine and seemed almost tender, I had placed my hand over hers in bed and asked whether we could try to be close again. She had looked away, not cruelly at first, but tired, as if I had asked her to lift something too heavy. "Tom, we're not young anymore," she said. "Some things fade. It's natural. Don't make it awkward." I apologized that night. I apologized for wanting my wife. Now I stood in our bedroom holding evidence that nothing had faded, except her desire for me. Something changed then. I have replayed that moment in my head more times than I can bear. People imagine revenge as a heat, a red explosion. Mine was not. Mine was a quiet narrowing. The room became sharper, the air steadier, the shaking in my hands stopped. Pain did not leave, but it moved aside and became fuel for something colder. I walked downstairs to the garage. The workshop smelled of dust, oil, sawdust, and old cardboard. On the second shelf above the bench, I kept adhesives, sealants, solvents, things used for serious repair. I knew each bottle by weight and purpose, because men who work with their hands learn respect for labels. My eyes settled on the industrial bonding compound I had bought months earlier to repair a cracked stone edging around the pool. Clear, viscous, fast curing, permanent, warnings in block letters. Avoid skin contact, seek immediate medical attention, do not use on bodily surfaces. I stood with it in my hand. The house behind me seemed impossibly quiet. Outside, through the garage window, water splashed and Margaret laughed again. There is a version of me that put the bottle back. That man might be free of what followed. He might be able to stand in judgment over me now. But he was not in that garage. I was. I emptied the lubricant into the utility sink, rinsed the bottle just enough to remove the obvious scent, and filled it with the adhesive. I moved slowly, precisely, the way I had handled registered mail and route keys in disciplinary paperwork for decades. No spill, no rush, no trembling. I carried the bottle back upstairs and placed it exactly where I found it, angled toward the lamp, label facing outward. Then I locked the bedroom door from the inside and exited through the adjoining bathroom into the hall, leaving the bedroom accessible from the hallway, but not from the inside once closed. It was a stupid detail and a brilliant one. It would make panic heavier. I went to the kitchen and made myself a meatloaf sandwich. That is the part that people never understand when they hear fragments of what happened. They imagine I sat there grinning, enjoying myself, already victorious. I did not. I sat at the breakfast table chewing food that tasted like paper, while my entire life screamed silently inside my chest. I watched the microwave clock. I listened for footsteps. I thought about Emily as a baby asleep on my chest, while Margaret rested in the hospital bed after 16 hours of labor. I thought about Margaret at 30, hair pinned badly while painting the nursery yellow because she said white walls made babies lonely. I thought about David kneeling in front of Emily at Thanksgiving, asking her to marry him while Margaret cried into a napkin, and I pretended not to. No one betrays one moment. They betray every memory attached to it. At 12:52, the patio door opened. Their voices entered first, low, playful, breathless. I looked down at my sandwich and kept eating. Wet feet crossed the kitchen tile. Margaret said something about towels. David chuckled. They did not see me because they did not expect me to exist in the middle of their secret. They moved through my house toward the stairs. Margaret's laugh softened as they climbed. A bedroom door closed overhead. Then silence. The first scream came at 1:59. It was not loud at first, more startled than terrified. Then a thud. Then David's voice, low and strained, saying, "Wait, wait, don't move." Then Margaret shouted my name, but not the way she had ever shouted it before. This was stripped of irritation, command, performance. This was animal fear. Furniture scraped violently. Something fell. David cursed. Margaret sobbed, oh God, what is happening?" Then louder, "Call 911. Call 911, Tom, please." I finished swallowing. I wiped my mouth with a paper towel. I stood and walked to the hallway. From upstairs came frantic movement, bodies trapped by consequence. For one brief, terrible second, satisfaction rose in me so pure it frightened me. Then it vanished beneath something darker. I had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed, and they had deserved a consequence, but deserving and doing are not the same thing. I understood that then. I still dialed. "My wife is screaming upstairs. I told the dispatcher, letting my voice shake just enough. "I think there's been an accident. She's locked in the bedroom. Please send help." Within minutes, the neighborhood became theater. Fire truck, ambulance, 2 police cruisers, Mrs. Callahan from across the street in gardening gloves, Mr. Bell with his phone half raised, pretending not to record. The firefighters moved with brisk professionalism until they reached the bedroom. Then professionalism strained against disbelief. The door came open under a pry bar. One firefighter stepped inside, stopped too suddenly, and muttered something I could not hear. Another followed and turned his face away, shoulders shaking once before he recovered. Margaret's humiliation filled the hallway before I saw her. She was wrapped in a sheet, hair wet, face blotched from crying, eyes wild with pain and rage. David was worse, bandaged partially already by paramedics, hunched and sweating, his skin marked where solvent and force had begun their work. They were no longer lovers. They were evidence. The lead paramedic, a woman with tired eyes and a calm voice, asked careful questions. What was used? How long ago? Was there chemical exposure? Margaret pointed at the bottle with a shaking hand and said, "Someone switched it." I widened my eyes. Switched what? Her stare could have cut glass. Don't. Margaret, I said softly in front of everyone, what exactly were you and David doing in our bedroom? That was the moment the firefighters stopped pretending not to listen. No one laughed loudly. Not then, not in the room. But humor has a way of flickering in human faces when horror arrives wearing absurd clothes. A young firefighter bit the inside of his cheek so hard I saw his jaw tighten. One of the police officers looked toward the ceiling, as if praying for strength. The entire scene was grotesque, humiliating, and unforgettable. I stood inside it as the wronged husband, concerned and bewildered, while the truth lay bare on stretchers. "Tom," Margaret whispered as they wheeled her past me, "we need to talk." "Of course," I said, "when you're ready." I did not follow the ambulance. That was my first public act of abandonment. It felt smaller than it was. I stayed home. I claimed nothing. I opened windows. I sat in the living room, where the house still smelled of pool water, adhesive solvent and shame. The phone rang 15 times in the next hour. Unknown numbers. Emily, David, Margaret, Emily again. I let each one ring until silence returned. At 3:36, Emily burst through the front door wearing blue scrubs from the veterinary clinic, her hair pulled back messily, her face pale with anger before she even understood what kind of anger was required. "Dad, what happened?" I looked at my daughter and felt something inside me loosen painfully. She was 32, but in that instant, I saw the 6-year-old version of her standing in the kitchen, holding a broken ceramic bird from Margaret's shelf, terrified that she had ruined something precious. Back then I had knelt and told her objects could be fixed or replaced, and people mattered more. I wondered when that lesson had stopped being true in our family. "Your mother and David were injured," I said. "Injured how?" He called from the hospital and wouldn't explain. "Mom won't answer. The nurse said chemical burns." "Chemical burns, Dad? What the hell happened?" "You should ask your husband." Her face tightened. "Why was David here?" "That is also a question for your husband." She stared at me, and I watched denial protect her like a thin sheet of glass. "No." I said nothing. "No," she repeated softer this time. "Don't do that. Don't look at me like that. Whatever you think, you're wrong." "Emily." "No, Mom would not. David would not. This is insane." I leaned back in the chair. I saw them. Her mouth opened but nothing came out. For a moment the room held both of us inside the same unbearable fact. Then she shook her head hard, almost violently. "You misunderstood. You must have. Maybe she was sick. Maybe he was helping her. Maybe something happened, and you're turning it into something ugly because you're upset. I watched your mother kiss your husband in the pool." Her hand flew to her stomach. She sat down slowly on the edge of the sofa, as if her legs had gone unreliable. "Stop." I watched them go upstairs. "Stop. They used our bedroom. Dad, please stop." I stopped, not because she deserved mercy more than truth, but because truth had already entered her and begun its work. I could see it. Her breathing changed. Her eyes drifted toward the stairs. Her mind replayed things she had dismissed, just as mine had. A wife knows a husband's absences. A daughter knows a mother's pauses. Denial can survive ignorance. It struggles against memory. The front door opened before either of us spoke again. Margaret entered wearing hospital discharge clothes under David's jacket, which was one final insult neither of them seemed aware enough to hide. David followed, moving stiffly, bandaged and grim. Emily stood so fast the coffee table shifted under her knee. "Tell me it isn't true," she said. Margaret looked at me first. That told Emily everything. The sound my daughter made then did not resemble crying. It was lower, broken, almost childish. David reached toward her and she stepped back so sharply he froze. He said, "Do not call me that. Please, this isn't how it looks." She laughed once, a dead sound. "You came from the hospital with my mother wearing your jacket, and adhesive burns on both of you. Tell me exactly how it looks." Margaret sank into a chair, face twisted in pain. "Emily, listen to me. Your father is unstable right now. He did something dangerous. He switched that bottle." My daughter turned toward me, and I felt the next pressure cycle begin. Betrayal was no longer only about what had happened in the pool. It was about who would control the story afterward. "Dad," she whispered. I looked at Margaret. "Interesting. You are more concerned with how it happened than why the bottle was being used." David's jaw tightened. "You assaulted us. I called emergency services. You set a trap. For whom? I was under the impression you came here to help Margaret through a panic attack." His face changed. "Not much, just enough." Emily saw it too. "What panic attack?" she asked. Margaret closed her eyes. David swallowed. "Your mother called me because she wasn't feeling well." "Then why were you in the pools?" "She was trying to calm down." "And the bedroom?" "Emily," Margaret said sharply, regaining some of the controlling tone she had used all my married life, "this is not the time." My daughter looked at her mother as if seeing a stranger wearing a familiar face. "How long?" No one answered. Emily took one step toward David. "How long?" He looked down. "Answer me." Margaret said very quietly, 14 months. The number landed like furniture dropped from a height. 14 months. Not a mistake. Not passion overtaking sense. A hidden calendar. Seasons. Holidays. Birthdays. Lies layered over meals and phone calls and Sunday visits. Emily sat down again, but this time she folded inward, hands covering her mouth. David tried to speak. Margaret tried to explain. Their words overlapped, softened, defended, reshaped. They used phrases like "we never meant," and "it became complicated," and "we were going to tell you." Emily only shook her head. I watched her break and knew that even my rage could not protect me from the sight of my child's suffering. That should have been the worst of it. It was not. 3 days later, a woman from Oak Meadow Senior Living rang my doorbell. She wore a gray suit and carried a leather portfolio. Her smile had the practiced softness of people who sell expensive guilt to exhausted families. "Mr. Whitmore, I'm Janice Lowell. I know this may be a sensitive time, but your family had asked us to follow up regarding transition options." "Transition options," I repeated. "Yes, your daughter and wife had expressed concern about your cognitive changes and potential aggression. We discussed memory care, assisted living, and resistant admission planning." My hand remained on the doorframe. I felt the house tilt around me. "Resistant admission planning." Her smile faltered. "Families sometimes need guidance when an elderly relative lacks insight into their own decline." I invited her in because the Postal Service had taught me never to reject information when it arrived unsolicited. I made coffee I did not drink. She opened her folder and showed me notes. "Initial inquiry by Emily. Facility tour attended by Margaret. Follow-up call from David. Concerns listed: confusion with finances, paranoia, emotional volatility, possible risk to spouse. Monthly cost, $5,200. Payment options discussed: pension, home equity, liquidation of savings." They had not merely betrayed me. They had planned a future where I was removed. Before I knew about the affair, they had already started building the cage. I asked Janice questions calmly. Dates, names, exact phrases, whether any medical documentation had been provided. None had. Whether any doctor had evaluated me. No. Whether they asked about what would happen if I objected. Yes. Margaret specifically asked whether family members could proceed if the resident resisted due to impaired judgment. When Janice left, apologizing repeatedly once she sensed the reality of what she had walked into. I remained at the table until the light shifted across the wall. I did not rage. I did not cry. I sat in the aftershock of understanding. The affair was not the whole betrayal. It was only the visible portion. Beneath it ran a deeper structure. They had decided my life could be managed without me. That evening, David called. "Tom," he said quickly, then corrected himself. "Mr. Whitmore, I think we should talk." "I'd agree. Emily is destroyed. You need to understand that. She's barely functioning because you destroyed her marriage." A pause. "I made mistakes. 14 months of mistakes. People fall in love in complicated situations." I nearly laughed. "You sound like a man trying to put perfume on sewage." His breath sharpened. "You don't get to act morally superior after what you did with that bottle." "No, perhaps I don't." That answer unsettled him because he expected denial. People who manipulate prefer opponents who defend themselves predictably. I gave him nothing to push against. He tried again. "If you admit it was an impulsive act, maybe we can keep this from becoming legal. Maybe everyone can avoid charges. Margaret doesn't want to press anything if you agree to get help." There it is. What? Help, Oak Meadow, cognitive decline, aggression, the story you were building before Tuesday. Silence, long enough to confirm everything. "Who came to see you?" he asked finally. "Someone more honest than you." "Listen," he said, voice lower now, no longer pleading. "You need to be careful. Emily is fragile. Margaret is injured. If you make this uglier, people will start asking why a retired man with access to industrial chemicals decided to switch a bottle in a bedroom. You may think you're in control, but you're not." There it was, the private David. Not the charming son-in-law, not the apologetic husband, but the man beneath. Smooth, threatening, practical. "You're right," I said. "People will ask questions." "Good. Then let's meet tonight. All of us. We can decide how to handle this like adults." "Yes," I said. "Bring anything you have related to Oak Meadow." He hesitated. "Why?" "Because if we're going to discuss my decline, we should examine the evidence." At 7 o'clock they came. Margaret first, dressed carefully despite her injuries, moving with the controlled discomfort of a woman determined not to look weak. David and Emily arrived together, but did not stand together. Emily looked hollow, as if sleep had left her body days earlier and refused to return. David's bandages showed at his wrist. He avoided looking at the staircase. I had prepared the living room like a conference room. Folders on the coffee table, copies of phone records, notes from Oak Meadow, my own handwritten timeline. I had spent the afternoon building what I had built my entire working life. A route map. Betrayal has logistics. Lies have timestamps. Desire has receipt. Margaret saw the folders and stopped. "Robert, this is unnecessary." "My name is Thomas," I said quietly. "You know that, Margaret." Her face flushed. She had called me Robert because panic made her reach for the wrong version of me. Perhaps the version she rehearsed in lies. Emily looked at her sharply. Another small crack, another detail filed. We sat. At first they tried to manage me. Margaret used soft guilt. David used practical compromise. Emily used pleading confusion. They wanted the affair separated from the facility planning, the hospital incident separated from the phone records, the emotional damage separated from the money. That is how manipulators survive. They isolate facts so no one sees the pattern. I opened the first folder. 17 calls between Margaret and David during work hours in the last 30 days. 12 sick days logged by Margaret in 3 months, all overlapping with David's off-site schedule. Oak Meadow inquiry opened 2 weeks before the pool incident. Facility tour attended by Margaret. Follow-up questions asked by David about resistant placement. Emily stared at the papers. "David," he leaned forward. "I was trying to help. Your mom was worried about him." "About me," I said. "Say it plainly. You were worried about me." Margaret clasped her hands. "We were concerned, Tom. You had become withdrawn. You spent hours alone in the garage. You forgot things." "I forgot nothing important. You forgot our anniversary dinner reservation. Because you told me you had a book club meeting and would rather go out the next night." She blinked. I turned a page. "You forgot your lie." Emily covered her face. David's voice hardened. This is exactly what I mean. This hostility. This obsession with tracking everything. It isn't normal. No, I said. It is documentation. You're trying to punish everyone. I am trying to understand what happened to my life while I was still living inside it. The room went quiet then, not because they felt sympathy, but because the sentence made the air heavier. For a brief second, even Margaret seemed tired of defending herself. Then Emily whispered, "Mom, were you going to sell the house?" Margaret's mouth tightened. David answered too quickly, "No." I opened the second folder. 3 calls to Benton Realty. Questions about estimated listing value, likely timeline, and whether a property could be sold by spouse if primary owner became medically incapacitated. Emily stood so abruptly the chair rocked backward. "You were going to sell Dad's house." "It is our marital home," Margaret said, her voice regaining steel. "And your father was not using it well. He rattled around in it like a ghost." I looked at her. "I maintained it. You hid in it. I lived in it." "You stopped living years ago," she snapped. "You retired and shrank. You became routines and complaints and garage projects. You think betrayal started with me. But do you know what it is like being married to someone who slowly disappears and expects you to call that loyalty?" The room held its breath. That was the first honest thing she had said, and because it was honest, it wounded more cleanly than any lie. I felt shame rise before anger could stop it. The shame was old, slow male. Had I become small? Had I mistaken contentment for surrender? Had I left her alone inside the marriage before she ever touched David? A weaker story would have let me dismiss her words entirely. Life does not allow such mercy. She was wrong in what she did, but not every sentence she spoke was false. David saw the effect and moved in. Exactly. Everyone saw it. Emily saw it. Margaret was drowning and I was there. Emily turned on him. "Do not use me." "I'm not. You convinced me Dad was dangerous. He was unstable. You told me he threatened you." "He did." "When?" David looked at me, then away. "On the phone." I said, "Your mother died last year, according to him." Emily frowned. "What?" "When David called me 3 days ago, he said maybe you were worried after my mother died last year." My mother died 12 years ago. He did not even know the facts of the man he was diagnosing. Emily's face collapsed further, and I hated David more for that than for touching Margaret. He had not only taken my wife, he had weaponized my daughter's concern. The conversation spiraled for 2 hours. Accusations, denials, partial admissions. Margaret finally confessed she loved David. David claimed he loved both women in different ways, which produced a sound from Emily that still visits me in nightmares. Emily accused Margaret of stealing her husband, then turned on herself for not seeing it sooner. Margaret accused me of emotional absence. David accused me of assault. I accused them of conspiracy. No one left that room whole. Then I opened the final folder. Money changes silence differently than truth. Inside were documents from the inheritance Margaret did not know existed. My uncle Nathaniel had died 6 years earlier with no children, no debts, and a talent for buying land before highways arrived. His estate came to me quietly through a law firm in Albany. $4.8 million after taxes, invested conservatively, kept separate, never commingled with marital funds because some buried instinct told me not to tell anyone. I had lived on my pension and our ordinary accounts because I wanted to remain the man I had always been, or because I was afraid wealth would reveal what love concealed. Margaret stared at the account balance as if it had slapped her. Emily looked up slowly. "Dad." David leaned forward, greed and horror warring openly across his face. "This," I said, "is what you did not know when you decided I was disposable." Margaret's lips parted. "You hid this from me." "Yes, for 6 years, yes, I am your wife. And yet here we are." She reached for the paper, but I pulled it back. "Separate inheritance, separate accounts, no marital commingling. I confirmed it this afternoon." David sank back. For the first time, he looked truly beaten, not ashamed. Beaten. He had not simply lost a secret lover. He had miscalculated the value of the old man in the house. I looked at him. "You betrayed a woman who loved you, risked public humiliation, and helped build a plan to remove me from my own home, all while standing 3 feet away from a fortune you would never touch." His jaw worked soundlessly. I looked at Margaret. You traded 30 years for stolen afternoons with a man who makes less in a year than these accounts earn in interest. Her face twisted. You cruel bastard. No, I said. I am finally accurate. Emily began crying again, but quietly now, exhausted beyond the dramatic. I didn't know, she kept whispering. I didn't know, Dad. I swear I didn't know. I wanted to believe her. I mostly did. But wanting to believe someone after betrayal is not the same as trust. Trust does not return because facts improve. Trust returns, if it returns at all, through long discomfort. By midnight they were gone. Margaret left for a hotel. David returned to whatever apartment or couch would take him. Emily sat in her car in my driveway for 20 minutes before driving away. I watched from the window without going after her. I told myself she needed space. The truth was I did not know how to comfort her without reopening the part of me that still saw her as innocent. The legal war began the next morning. My attorney, Lillian Ward, was a woman in her 50s with silver hair cut precisely at her jaw and eyes that suggested she had long ago stopped being surprised by what married people do to each other. She listened to my story without interruption. The affair, the adhesive incident, Oak Meadow, the real estate inquiries, the inheritance, Emily, David, Margaret. When I finished, she tapped her pen once against the table. You are not as exposed as you think, she said. I switched the bottle. You did something reckless and potentially criminal. I will not pretend otherwise, but they would have to explain why they were using that bottle in your bedroom. Publicly, under oath, with your daughter's husband involved. People often threaten lawsuits until litigation requires them to tell the truth. What about divorce? Adultery, documented conspiracy regarding your competency, attempted financial manipulation, and separate inheritance. Margaret will leave with far less than she expects. She will fight. Of course, people who feel entitled to comfort always fight hardest when comfort is removed. Lillian was right. Margaret fought. She painted me as cold, controlling, unstable, vengeful. Her attorney suggested the adhesive incident proved danger. Lillian responded by placing Oak Meadow records on the table and asking whether Margaret wished to explain why alleged cognitive concerns had preceded the affair's exposure, and why real estate valuations were discussed before any medical evaluation. Margaret's attorney requested a private recess. Pressure cycle after pressure cycle followed. Margaret filed for temporary access to accounts she had never known existed. Denied. She requested exclusive use of the house. Denied. She hinted at criminal complaint. Lillian prepared a public deposition outline involving sexual conduct with her son-in-law, and the threat vanished. David tried to persuade Emily not to proceed with divorce, claiming public scandal would destroy them both. Emily discovered he had emptied a joint savings account 2 days after the hospital incident. Her divorce filing became immediate and vicious. For months my life became paper. Court notices on the kitchen counter, lawyer calls during breakfast, financial affidavits, statements, timelines, screenshots, bills. The emotional destruction became administrative, which somehow made it worse. Grief is supposed to come with candles, tears, perhaps rain against windows. Mine came stapled, notarized, and filed in triplicate. The middle months were the heaviest, not because of dramatic confrontations, but because everything became slow, suffocatingly slow. Margaret's possessions remained in the house for weeks, because moving arrangements became another battlefield. Her clothes hung in the closet like accusations. Her perfume remained in scarves. A hairbrush in the drawer. A lipstick under the bathroom sink. Evidence of a life that had been intimate before it became fraudulent. I would open a cabinet for aspirin and find a bottle of vitamins she bought. I would reach for coffee and remember her standing there years earlier in one of my old shirts, pregnant with Emily, laughing because she had put salt in the sugar bowl by mistake. Memory betrayed me almost as deeply as she had. I hated her. I missed her. I wanted her ruined. I wanted her to call and sound like the woman I married. I wanted an apology large enough to reverse time. I wanted impossible things, and wanting them made me ashamed. Emily came to the house once during that period. She stood in the doorway looking thinner, older, holding a box of things David had left in her garage. "I found photos," she said. I let her in. She placed the box on the table and removed a stack of printed pictures. Not intimate ones. Worse in some ways. Candid pictures of Margaret and David at restaurants, parking lots, a motel outside the county, both laughing, both careless. Emily had found them in David's cloud backup after her attorney requested device access. She did not cry while showing me. That frightened me more than crying would have. "He took pictures," she said, "like souvenirs." "I'm sorry. I keep wondering whether I was stupid the whole time, or whether he was just better at lying than I was at seeing. Those are not the same thing." She looked at me. "You didn't see either." "No." That was the first honest bridge between us. Not forgiveness, not comfort, shared blindness. She sat across from me for nearly an hour. We talked without solving anything. She told me David had slowly discouraged her from visiting friends, mocked her job, criticized her weight, questioned her memory, and framed every disagreement as proof that she was too emotional. She admitted he had been the one to push Oak Meadow hardest, showing her articles about dementia and claiming Margaret was afraid of me. Emily believed him because believing him protected her from the worst possibility, that her marriage was rotten. "He made me scared of you," she said. "And you let him." She flinched. I regretted the words immediately, but did not retract them. Some truths need to hurt in order to remain visible. "Yes," she said after a long pause. "I did." The divorces finalized in winter. Margaret received almost nothing beyond personal property, a modest portion of shared household funds and her car. David received nothing from Emily, except a court order regarding debts he had tried to hide. Margaret and David attempted to live together briefly. It lasted 3 months. Affairs survived secrecy better than rent, fatigue, unemployment, and mutual suspicion. He accused her of ruining his marriage. She accused him of pursuing younger women from a job site. They separated after a public argument outside a grocery store, where, according to someone Lillian knew, Margaret threw a carton of eggs at him and missed. I expected satisfaction when I heard. Instead, I felt tired. After the divorce, I sold the house. People told me I should keep it because winning meant staying, but they were wrong. Every room had become a witness. The pool water had been drained months earlier, but I still saw them in it whenever sunlight struck the tile. The bedroom door had been repaired, but I still heard Margaret screaming through it. The kitchen table remained solid oak, but I could not sit there without tasting meatloaf and adhesive in the back of my throat. Survival requires leaving some battlefields behind. I bought a cedar house in the Colorado mountains, 15 acres outside a town small enough that people noticed newcomers, but polite enough not to ask too much at once. The house had tall windows, stone floors, and silence so complete it made my ears ring the first week. Emily moved into the guest cabin 6 months later, after selling what remained of her marital home. I did not invite her immediately. She asked carefully, prepared for refusal. I said yes with conditions: separate finances, therapy, work, no pretending. She accepted all of them. We rebuilt badly at first. She over-apologized. I over-controlled. She tried to cook dinners I did not want. I corrected small things too sharply. She flinched when my voice changed. I noticed and hated myself. Sometimes we went a full week speaking only about groceries, weather, or her shifts at the animal clinic. Sometimes she cried on the porch and asked whether I would ever look at her without remembering Oak Meadow. I told her I did not know. That was not kind, but it was true. Children show damage differently when they are adults. Emily became careful with doors, with words, with silence. She asked permission to borrow tools. She apologized for using the washing machine. She read every document before signing anything, even veterinary clinic forms. She stopped trusting easy charm. If a man complimented her too quickly, she went cold. If someone raised their voice in a restaurant, her shoulders tightened. David had left fingerprints on her nervous system. I had my own damage. I installed cameras at the Cedar house, even though there was no reason. I checked locks twice. I kept financial documents in 3 locations. I did not date. A widow named Paula from the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center sometimes walked with me and spoke gently about birds, weather, and grief. But whenever conversation approached loneliness, I stepped away. I had survived betrayal, but survival had not made me brave. It had made me precise. Margaret wrote letters for a while. The first was defensive, the second apologetic, the third angry, the fourth almost honest. She said she had not known how to be married to a man who seemed content to fade. She said David had made her feel seen. She said she regretted the facility plan, then added that she truly had worried about me, which ruined the apology. I placed each letter in a drawer and never answered. Eventually, they stopped. 1 year after the pool, Emily and I drove back east for a final court matter involving David's hidden debts. Afterward, I saw Margaret in the courthouse parking lot. She looked smaller. Her hair had gone gray at the roots. She wore a practical coat I did not recognize. We stood 10 feet apart while wind blew old leaves along the curb. "Tom," she said. "Margaret, I heard you moved." "Yes, with Emily nearby." She nodded, absorbing the fact that my daughter had returned to me in a way Margaret never would. "Are you happy?" I considered lying, then found I did not have the energy. "No." She looked surprised. "I am freer," I said. "That is not the same thing." Her eyes filled. "I'm not happy either. I know. I ruined everything." "Yes." She waited for more, perhaps forgiveness, perhaps cruelty. I gave her neither. "Did you ever love me?" she asked. The question angered me because it was not hers to ask. "I loved you so long that I did not notice when loving you became self-erasure." She closed her eyes. I walked away before pity could make me stupid. 2 years passed. The mountain house became familiar, but never warm in the way people mean when they speak of home. Emily advanced in her veterinary studies and began working with injured raptors at the rehabilitation center. She grew steadier but not light. I photographed storms, elk tracks, abandoned mining cabins, frost on fence wire. Some prints sold in a Denver gallery. People praised their stillness. They did not know stillness can be another form of injury. On the anniversary of the day itself, I woke before dawn and made coffee. Snow had fallen overnight, covering the deck in unmarked white. Emily came over around 8, carrying a bag of pastries. She did not mention the date, neither did I. We ate in silence, while the mountains brightened slowly behind the windows. After a long while she said, "I still see it sometimes." "What?" "Mom's face at the hospital, David's hands, your face in the living room, all of it." I nodded. "Do you regret what you did?" I looked at the coffee cooling in my cup. There are many answers to that question, and none of them are clean. I regret the violence of it. I regret that Emily had to learn the truth through catastrophe. I regret the part of myself that felt satisfaction while others screamed. I regret that betrayal made me capable of something I had not believed lived in me. But do I regret ending the lie? No. Do I regret refusing the cage they were building? No. Do I regret surviving? Some days, maybe. Yes, I said finally. And no. She accepted that because she had learned that truth rarely arrives as one thing. That evening, after Emily returned to her cabin, I stood alone on the deck while dark settled over the valley. The air was sharp enough to hurt my lungs. Far below, lights from the small town flickered like distant signals from a life I could observe but not fully enter. I thought about the man I had been before lunch that Tuesday. Trusting, passive, lonely without admitting it. I thought about the man I became after. Careful, suspicious, rich in money, poor in innocence. People like to say betrayal teaches strength. That is only partly true. Betrayal teaches you where the floor is weakest. Strength is what remains after you stop expecting the house to hold. Margaret was somewhere else. David was somewhere else. Emily was nearby but changed. I was alive, solvent, legally victorious, physically safe, and permanently altered. That is the part stories usually soften. They want survival to feel like sunrise. They want justice to feel cleansing. But some endings are not clean. Some endings are just the moment after impact, stretched across the rest of a life. The snow kept falling. The mountains disappeared into darkness. I stood there until my hands went numb, listening to nothing, feeling no triumph, no comfort, no restoration. Only the cold fact of myself, still standing after everything familiar had been stripped away. And the cruelest truth remained the simplest one. I had not lost Margaret at the pool. I had lost her slowly, over years, in rooms where no one screamed. I had lost Emily to lies before she ever contacted Oak Meadow. I had lost myself by calling silence peace. What happened that Tuesday only revealed the ruin that had already been built. I survived it. That is all. I survived, and survival was not the same as being healed. In the months that followed, I learned that a person can win every formal battle, and still lose the ability to feel safe inside an ordinary day. The divorce papers were signed, the accounts remained protected, the house sold quickly to a young family who wrote me a polite letter about how much they loved the pool. And yet none of it gave me back the unthinking ease of entering a room without first noticing exits, phones, glances, and closed doors. I became a man who listened too carefully. If Emily paused before answering a question, I heard deception even when none existed. If a neighbor smiled too warmly, I wondered what they wanted. If a woman at the grocery store asked whether I needed help reaching something from a high shelf, I felt insulted first and grateful only later, after shame had already passed through me. Betrayal did not merely destroy my marriage, it altered the instruments by which I measured the world. Therapy helped less than people promised, and more than I wanted to admit. The therapist was named Dr. Mara Ellison, a woman around 50 with calm hands, and a habit of allowing silence to become uncomfortable without rescuing me from it. The first time I told her the story, I told it like testimony. Facts, times, locations, sequence, pool, bottle, bedroom, emergency call, Oak Meadow, inheritance, divorce. I kept my voice even and watched her pen move occasionally across the page. When I finished, she did not tell me I was justified. She did not tell me I was monstrous. She said, "You speak about the day with extraordinary control. What happens if you stop controlling it for 1 minute?" I disliked her immediately. Then I kept going back because dislike was easier than helplessness. I did stop controlling it eventually, though not in her office at first. It happened in a supermarket parking lot in late autumn, standing beside my truck with a paper bag of groceries split open at my feet. A jar of pasta sauce had shattered on the asphalt, red spreading slowly between my shoes, and the sight of it, the ridiculous red mess, brought back the adhesive bottle, the hospital blankets, Margaret's face, Emily's voice. I stood there unable to move while strangers walked around me. An older man asked if I was all right. I said yes, but my voice broke on the word. I drove home without half the groceries and sat in the truck until sunset, hands on the wheel, finally understanding that self-control can become another room you lock yourself inside. Emily saw these changes because she had become watchful too. That was one of the quieter tragedies between us. We loved each other through observation, not ease. She noticed when I slept badly. I noticed when she avoided calls from unknown numbers. She noticed that I never left mail unopened. I noticed that she positioned chairs with her back to walls in restaurants. We did not discuss every wound. Some we simply stepped around, like furniture in a dark room. There were evenings when she seemed almost young again, laughing at a hawk that stole a glove from the porch railing, or complaining about the impossible volume of veterinary textbooks. Then a phrase, a phone chime, a man's cologne in a hardware store would close her face, and she would vanish inward. I would recognize the movement because I did it too. Once during a snowstorm, she admitted she still dreamed of David. Not romantic dreams, not longing, dreams where he stood in a hallway calmly explaining that none of what happened was real, that she had misunderstood, that she was unstable, that everyone else agreed. "In the dream I believe him," she said, staring into the fire. "That's the worst part. I wake up furious because some part of me still falls for his voice." I told her manipulation works because it borrows the shape of love. She looked at me for a long time and said, "Mom did that to you too?" I said yes. Then neither of us spoke for nearly an hour. The world expects old men to be either wise or bitter. It has little patience for the truth, which is that age does not protect you from being foolish. I was foolish in ways that still embarrass me. I mistook endurance for devotion. I believed providing meant being loved. I trusted routine, because routine required less courage than intimacy. Margaret did not ruin a perfect marriage. She exploited a weakened one. That distinction matters because without it I become only a victim, and victimhood, however deserved, can become another disguise for avoiding responsibility. I had disappeared inside my own life long before she chose David. I had become quiet because quiet asked nothing of me. She answered that silence with betrayal, and that choice was hers. But the silence existed before the betrayal entered it. None of these recognitions softened what she did. If anything, they made it worse because they gave the pain roots. I could not dismiss her as purely evil, and therefore separate from the life we had shared. She had loved me once. I know she had. There are memories too specific to be counterfeit. Her hand on my neck when my father died, the way she stayed awake sewing Emily's Halloween costume after 3 failed attempts, the small note she left in my lunchbox during my first week as a route supervisor that said, "They'll learn you're right eventually." Those things were real. So was the woman in the pool. So was the woman who toured Oak Meadow. The mind wants one version to erase the other. It does not. Both remain, and their coexistence is the prison. In the second year, Margaret sent one final letter, not to ask forgiveness but to return something. Inside the envelope was the photograph from our 25th anniversary, the one where we stood beside the lake at dusk, her head against my shoulder, both of us laughing because the wind had knocked over the tripod twice. On the back she had written, "I do not know who we were in this picture anymore, but I know they existed." I placed it in a drawer and did not look at it for 6 months. When I finally did, I felt no desire to call her. I felt only the grief of archaeological evidence, proof of a vanished civilization. David's life deteriorated with a predictability that offered no joy. He moved twice, lost another job, and eventually left the state. Emily heard from a former friend that he was dating someone younger, and repeating the same polished stories about being misunderstood, ambitious, emotionally neglected. Predators rarely retire from the method that works. Emily listened without visible reaction and later burned an old box of wedding programs in the outdoor fire pit behind her cabin. She did it silently. I stood nearby in case she wanted company. She did not. When the last gold-edged card curled into ash, she said, "I hate that I loved him." I said, "That means you were human." She said, "I don't want to be human that way again." There was no easy restoration between us, because easy restoration would have been dishonest. We built something else, more formal than before, perhaps colder but sturdier. She paid back the school loan every month even when I told her she could delay during exam weeks. She sent me copies of major documents before signing them, not because I demanded it, but because transparency had become her way of apologizing repeatedly without using the word. I learned to say less when she made decisions differently than I would. She learned to tell me hard things before they became emergencies. Trust returned not as warmth, but as evidence accumulated over time. It was not beautiful, it was functional. Some rebuilt bridges are not scenic, they only need to hold. By the third winter, I stopped expecting healing to arrive as a feeling. I began to understand that perhaps healing is only the reduction of surprise. The memories still came, but they no longer knocked me completely to the floor. The anger still came, but it moved through familiar channels. The loneliness still came, especially at dusk, when the house entered that hour where marriage used to have sounds. A drawer closing, water running, someone clearing their throat in another room. But I no longer mistook loneliness for proof that I had made the wrong choice. Loneliness was clean. Betrayal had not been. On the last night I will speak of, snow covered the valley so completely that the road disappeared. Emily stayed in her cabin because walking over would have been foolish. Power flickered once, then held. I sat in the main room with the fireplace low and the old anniversary photograph on the table beside me. I had taken it from the drawer without knowing why. Margaret and I smiled from another lifetime, young enough to believe damage was something that happened to other people. I studied our faces until they became strangers. Then I placed the photograph into the fire. It blackened from the edges inward slowly, almost gently, until our faces folded into heat and vanished. I expected pain. I expected release. I felt neither, only a quiet confirmation that some things do not need to be preserved simply because they were once real. The past had existed. It had shaped me. It had betrayed me. It did not need an altar. Outside, the snow kept falling without sound. In the reflection of the window, I saw an old man sitting alone in firelight, neither victorious nor defeated, only present. His face looked harder than it once had. His eyes looked careful. He had survived love, humiliation, revenge, courtrooms, money, silence, and the slow education of consequences. He had not become better in any simple way. He had become less available to illusion. That was the final outcome, colder than justice and more permanent than anger. I lived, they lived. No one returned to who they had been. The family did not heal into something tender. It settled into distance, guarded civility, and the occasional necessary phone call. Margaret became a name on old paperwork. David became a warning Emily carried in her body. Emily became my daughter again, but never my little girl. I became a man who understood that survival can be a narrow room with a locked door, and sometimes you are grateful for the lock. I turned off the lamp before midnight. The room went dark, except for the dull red pulse of the fire. I stood at the window for a long time, looking at my own reflection over the black outline of the mountains. There was no comfort in the view, but there was truth. The life I had now was not the life I wanted before everything happened. It was what remained after the false life burned away. That had to be enough, because there was nothing else to recover.